Hello everyone, I wish you peace and happiness. Are you all healthy? Today, I will continue to share with you the difficult, scarce and challenging days of Huyen and her mother trying to make a living. De sat on the small chair beside the hospital bed, his hand still tightly holding Huyen and Appo's, as if afraid that letting go would cause her to fall into a deep sleep like before. He looked at her for a long time, his eyes filled with both happiness and emotion, then softly said, end quote, today we are finally going home, end quote. Hearing that, Huyen slowly turned to look at Da. Her eyes still looked tired, but when she heard the words end quote, going home end quote, her eyes suddenly lit up with joy. After many days lying in bed, enduring fevers and difficulty breathing, she was finally about to return to her small house, where Micah and Pippi the dog were waiting every day. De gently squeezed Huyen and Appo's hand and smiled softly. End quote, just rest assured and Don and Appo's, tea worry anymore. End quote, Huyen nodded faintly. She held Da and Appo's hand again, tears quietly streaming down her face. These were no longer tears of despair, but of emotion and hope to return to her beloved home after days of pain. De gently helped Huyen walk slowly through the small garden in front of the house. After many days lying in the hospital bed, Huyen and Appo's body was still weak, and her legs moved slowly, relying on Da and Appo's arm. The small path leading to the house was still familiar as it was in the past. On both sides were rows of green trees swaying in the wind. Huyen looked up and around, feeling both emotional and relieved to finally be back. Da always stayed close by, one hand supporting Huyen, softly saying, be careful, take it slow. In the morning, as the first sunlight seeped through the hospital room window, Da had woken up early. He gently approached the bed where Huyen and Micah had just opened their eyes after a long night. Da smiled at the mother and daughter and softly asked, end quote, are you both awake? End quote. Then he bent down to lift Micah from the bed and sat her upright beside him. Afterwards, Da sat down next to Huyen and gently took her hand. He looked at Huyen and Appo's still pale face, his voice full of concern. End quote, how did you sleep last night? Were you able to rest? Do you feel better today? End quote. Huyen nodded softly, her hand also clasping Da and Appo's. Although her body was still tired after a night and Appo's rest, she felt somewhat more comfortable. Micah sat beside her, looking at her mother, then gently leaned her head on Da and Appo's shoulder. In the quiet hospital room, the three sat close together, waiting for a new day with hope that Huyen would recover soon so that mother and daughter could return to their familiar little house. Da gently carried Micah and took her to the bathroom. He took a small towel, washed it clean under the water, wrung it out and carefully wiped Micah and Appo's face. Then, Da continued to clean the small hands of the girl. After caring for Micah, Da scooped a bucket of water, carefully carried it back to the hospital room with both hands. He placed the bucket on the bedside table, preparing water to wash her face and take care of Huyen. Micah stood beside him, watching Da, while Huyen lay on the hospital bed, silently observing everything he did. In the small room, Da and Appo's quiet care made the atmosphere warmer. Da dipped the towel into the basin of water, then squeezed it tightly to remove excess water. He gently wiped her face and each of Huyen and Appo's hands. Seeing Da still carefully tending to her, Huyen softly said, end quote, I can do it myself. End quote, let me do the rest, end quote, she added, end quote, and you can carry the basin of water onto the chair for me. End quote. Da looked at Huyen for a moment and then nodded softly. He carried the basin of water and placed it on the chair next to the hospital bed for her convenience. Huyen took the towel herself, slowly washing her hands and adjusting her clothes. Da approached the bedside table, quietly tidying up the items on it. He neatly arranged each bag, food container, and necessary items to make the hospital room more organized. Huyen sat on the bed, occasionally glancing at Da, feeling warm inside from his attentive care. De stepped outside to look for Micah for a while before returning to the hospital room. As soon as he entered, he saw Huyen trying to stand up, her hands unsteady, holding a basin of water, intending to pour it out. De was startled and quickly ran over to support Huyen. She was still unsteady on her feet. Why was she carrying the basin of water herself? Let me pour it out. Saying that, De gently helped Huyen sit back on the bed, then bent down to lift the basin of water. He went to the cabinet to get a clean set of clothes, then took the basin to the bathroom. De poured out all the water, washed it clean, and placed it aside. Afterwards, he changed into a more comfortable outfit and quickly returned to the hospital room. As soon as he entered, he looked toward Huyen, seeing her sitting quietly on the bed, which made him feel a bit more at ease. De approached the bed, gently took Micah and Appo's small hand and looked at Huyen. Stay in the hospital room and rest well. I and Micah will go buy some breakfast. Huyen nodded softly. De held Micah and Appo's hand and left the hospital room, walked through the corridor, and then exited the hospital gate. The outside morning had already become crowded, but De still held Micah and Appo's hand tightly, slowly leading the girl along the road in front of the hospital. The two of them went to a nearby porridge shop. De ordered a bowl of hot porridge, received the bowl from the vendor, and paid her. Then he held Micah and Appo's hand again, carefully guiding her back to the hospital room with Huyen. He only hoped that mother and daughter would eat well and gain enough strength to feel at ease returning home. Upon arriving at the hospital room, De placed the box of porridge on the small table beside the bed. He opened the lid and carefully divided the porridge into 2 portions. One for Micah and the remaining for Huyen. Suddenly a coughing fit struck again. Huyen sat on the bed, raising her hand to hold her chest, and each cough echoed, causing her face to grimace in discomfort. De quickly turned, set down the porridge, and stepped beside Huyen. He gently supported her shoulder and asked anxiously, and quote, "How are you? Are you feeling uncomfortable?" End quote. Huyen tried to suppress her cough and shook her head softly. De still stood nearby, waiting until Huyen calmed down before feeling reassured. De gave Micah a portion of porridge and gently said, end quote, "Eat, Micah." End quote. But Micah didn't end Appo's eat immediately. She took the bowl of porridge to the bedside, wanting to feed her mother herself. She scooped a small spoonful of porridge and brought it to Huyen and Appo's mouth. Seeing this, De also stepped beside her, intending to feed Huyen. Huyen gently shook her head and said, end quote, "I can eat by myself. You feed Micah, please." End quote. After saying that, Huyen lifted the bowl of porridge and slowly ate each spoonful herself. De also sat down next to Micah, patiently scooping small spoonfuls to feed her. Micah obediently finished eating, occasionally glancing at her mother to make sure Huyen was still okay. When the mother and daughter finished eating, De stood up to get 2 glasses of water. He handed 1 glass to Huyen and the other to Micah. End quote. "Drink after you finish eating." End quote. Huyen took the glass and nodded slightly. Micah also held her glass with both hands, drinking small sips. Seeing that the mother and daughter had finished eating and drinking, De felt more at ease and his heart was a little lighter. Just then, the doctor entered the hospital room to examine Huyen again. The doctor checked her pulse, measured her blood pressure, and carefully reviewed her health indicators. De stood beside her anxiously waiting, his eyes always following the doctor and Appo's every move. After a moment the doctor nodded, smiled, and said to De, "The patient and Appo's health is now stable. She can be discharged today and go home. Please go to the reception to complete the discharge procedures. If the family can afford it, I recommend taking her to a higher-level hospital for a comprehensive health checkup." Hearing this, De breathed a sigh of relief. After many days of worry, he finally received the news he had been waiting for. De turned to look at Huyen and saw her faintly smiling. Micah, sitting beside her, hearing that her mother was about to go home, was delighted, her eyes shining brightly. De nodded in thanks to the doctor and said, "Yes, thank you, doctor. I will go to complete the procedures right away." De sat down beside the hospital bed, gently holding Huyen and Appo's hand. Hearing the news that she might be discharged today, Huyen couldn't and Appo's hold back her emotions. The exhausting days, the pain, and the moments when she thought she couldn't and Appo's go on suddenly flooded back, causing her eyes to turn red, tears silently falling. Huyen choked and said, "I want to go home." De gently squeezed her hand, his eyes full of compassion, then nodded softly. Afterwards, De stood up and left the hospital room to go to the duty station to complete the procedures. The door closed, leaving only Huyen and Micah lying together in the room. Huyen turned to look at her daughter, her weak hand reaching out to hold Micah and Appo's tiny hand. She smiled softly through her tears. "Today we are going home." Micah tightly held her mother and Appo's hand, happily snuggling close to Huyen. Huyen looked at her child, tears streaming down her cheeks again. After many days in the hospital, finally, mother and daughter are about to return to their familiar small house, where there is a garden, Pippi, and peaceful days awaiting. De went to the on-call room, where the doctor had prepared the discharge papers. The doctor handed him the commitment form, which De took and sat down to read through each line. After ensuring all the information was clear, he picked up a pen and signed the commitment form. Then De took the remaining money from his pocket, counted it once, and handed it to the doctor to settle the remaining hospital fees. Seeing his savings almost gone, he silently sighed, but felt relieved that Huyen was finally stable and could go home. After completing the procedures, De turned to bow and said, "Thank you very much, doctor." The doctor nodded, advising De to take Huyen home to rest and to pay attention to her health. De put the papers into his pocket and quickly left the on-call room, returning to the ward with Huyen and Micah. De returned to the hospital room, gently helped Huyen sit up, and then began to pack the remaining belongings on the table. He folded each item into the bag, checked the clothes, medicine, and documents, preparing everything so that mother and child could leave the hospital. De was bending down to put Micah and Appo's hat back on when he suddenly heard Huyen cough. He turned around and saw Huyen raising her hand to her chest, breathing somewhat labored. De quickly stepped over and supported her. "Are you okay? If you and Appo's not feeling well, let and Appo's sit down and rest a little longer." Huyen tried to breathe, then shook her head gently. Perhaps after many days in the hospital, she was eager to return to her small house. "I and Appo's am fine. Let and Appo's go home." Saying that, Huyen slowly stood up. De immediately reached out to support her, guiding her step by step out of the bed. Micah stood beside him holding De and Appo's hand. The three of them left the hospital room together, heading toward the hospital door and the road back home. De helped Huyen out to the corridor. After walking a short distance, he noticed she looked tired, so he gently helped Huyen sit down on the nearby chair. "Sit here and rest for a moment, I and Appo's. I'll go get the car," he said. After saying that, De took a few steps but still didn't and Appo's feel at ease. He turned back to look at Huyen, making sure she was still sitting steadily and showed no signs of abnormality before continuing to get the car. A little while later, De drove the motorcycle closer to where Huyen was sitting. Just then the doctor also arrived. Seeing Huyen still weak, the doctor stepped in to help De, gently assisting him to sit Huyen on the bike. The doctor advised, "Remember to rest, eat well, and take care of your health when you get home." Huyen nodded politely and said, "Yes, thank you very much, doctor." After ensuring Huyen was seated steadily, De put a helmet on Micah and sat on the bike. Micah sat in front, Huyen sat behind, gently holding on to De. The motorcycle gradually started moving, leaving the hospital gate. De looked back one last time before turning forward, slowly bringing Huyen and Micah back to their small house after many days of separation. The motorcycle carrying 3 people traveled a long distance. The way home was still quite far. But De noticed Huyen sitting behind was getting more and more tired, her body no longer steady. He slowed down and stopped the bike under a large banyan tree by the roadside. De got off the bike, gently helped Huyen sit down under the banyan tree to rest for a while. Sit here and rest for a bit, okay? Then De called Micah over. Micah, sit next to your mother and hold her. Okay? I'll go to the car to get some water and come back right away. After saying that, De quickly walked toward the vehicle. But just as he turned back, he suddenly saw Huyen lying sprawled on the ground. De hurriedly ran over, quickly helped Huyen up, and supported her to lean on him. Huyen, what in oppos? S wrong with you? De opened his bag, took out a bottle of water, poured some into a cup for Micah, and then gave the rest to Huyen to drink in small sips. Micah sat close to her mother, the two of them leaning on each other under the shade of a tree. Huyen, exhausted, closed her eyes, her face still pale after the long days of treatment. De sat beside them, silently watching the mother and daughter. His eyes looked distant along the road ahead, filled with worry. He only hoped Huyen could recover so that all three of them could safely return to the small house waiting at the end of the road. De sat down beside Huyen, saw that she was still tired, and gently asked, "Are you cold?" Huyen nodded slightly, but De still felt uneasy. He stood up and went to the car, took a jacket and gently put it on Huyen, wearing an extra layer to keep warm, as the journey home was still long. After Huyen rested for a while, De carefully helped her to stand up and then supported her to sit on the motorbike. He checked the seat to make sure Huyen was sitting steadily. Then Micah also got on the bike, sitting in front. De sat on the bike, turned back to look at Huyen one more time before starting the engine. The bike gradually started moving, and the three of them continued their journey home. The road ahead was still long, but in their hearts, they all looked forward to the moment they would see their familiar small house after days of being apart. The motorcycle slowly stopped in front of the house gate. Upon seeing the familiar house, Micah happily ran ahead, calling out loudly, "Mom, we and oppos, re-home!" De turned off the engine, got off and then turned to Huyen. Seeing that she was still weak, he took off his slippers and handed them to Huyen. "Please wear these slippers there and oppos. Still a bit of distance to the house." Huyen nodded softly, slipped on the slippers and helped her walk step by step. He carefully supported her arm, walking slowly along the small path leading into the house. On both sides were familiar green trees, their leaves gently swaying in the evening breeze. The gentle sunlight of the late afternoon cast a soft glow over the garden, filtering through the leaves to create patches of light on the small road. Huyen looked up at the scene before her, her eyes red with emotion. After many days in the hospital, she finally returned to the place she had always longed for. As soon as they arrived at the front yard, Micah happily called out, "Pippi, Pippi!" Hearing the familiar call, Pippi hurried out from the house. As soon as he saw Micah, the dog joyfully wagged his tail. Micah bent down to hug Pippi, excitedly calling his name after days of separation. De quietly helped Huyen walk behind. When they reached the front door, Huyen sat down slowly. Through the bamboo blinds, seeing Pippi happily cuddling, she cooed and oppos. T held back her emotions and reached out to stroke the dog and oppos' fur. "Pippi, Mom is back," she said. Pippi, as if understanding Huyen and oppos' words, kept wagging his tail and nuzzled her hand, looking happy. Huyen stroked Pippi while crying, tears streaming down her cheeks. Those were tears of happiness after days of separation. De stood quietly behind, watching the mother and child reunite with Pippi, feeling relieved. Finally, the small family had returned to their familiar home. De stepped in to open the house door and gently helped Huyen inside. After the long journey back, her legs were still weak, and each step was slow. De carefully supported Huyen to the bedside and gently laid her down. He pulled the thin blanket over Huyen, adjusted it neatly, and then stood up with peace of mind. De walked around the house, opening all the windows one by one. The gentle afternoon sunlight immediately flooded into the house, along with a cool breeze carrying the scent of the garden plants. The space, which had been closed off for many days, suddenly became brighter and more airy. Micah ran to the window, pulling the curtains aside with both hands. The sunlight shone into the room, illuminating the bed where Huyen was resting. Huyen slowly opened her eyes, looked around the familiar house and then faintly smiled. Finally she had returned home. A sudden cough came, causing Huyen to slightly frown. She raised her hand to hold her chest, trying to breathe slowly to soothe the cough. After a long journey, her body still felt very tired. Pippi, lying under the bed, saw Huyen cough and immediately stood up. The dog sat close to the bed, lifting its head to look at her without blinking, its tail wagging gently. Pippi softly barked a few times as if to ask how she was doing and to express happiness that Huyen had finally returned. Huyen looked down at Pippi, gently stroking the dog and Appo's head. Pippi joyfully barked again, then obediently sat under the bed, watching Huyen. The small house, after many days without her, now echoed with voices, Micah and Appo's and Pippi and Appo's making the atmosphere feel much warmer. They approached the bed, gently adjusting Huyen and Appo's pillow behind her head so she could lie more comfortably. Seeing that Huyen was still tired, he straightened the blanket and then turned to look at Micah. Be a good girl at home, watch over Mom. Dad went to buy some groceries to cook porridge for the two of them to eat. Micah obediently nodded, then sat beside the bed and took her mother and Appo's hand. They looked at Huyen one more time. Seeing that she had fallen asleep peacefully, he felt reassured. He stepped out of the house and headed to the village road to buy some things. Micah saw her mother lying on the bed, so she stood up to get a glass of water. Carefully, she poured water and brought it to the bedside, softly calling, "Mom, wake up and drink some water." Huyen slowly opened her eyes. She tried to prop herself up with her hands, but her body was still weak, so her movements were very slow. Micah quickly reached out to support her mother, and handed her the glass of water. Huyen took the glass and sipped small amounts. After drinking, she gently smiled at Micah and softly said, "Thank you, my dear." Micah placed the glass on the table and sat close to her mother. Micah saw Pippi lying under the bed and remembered that the dog was also thirsty. She stood up, took Pippi and Appo's small bowl and ran to the water jar. Micah filled the bowl with water, carefully carried it back into the house. She placed the bowl of water in front of Pippi and gently called, "Pippi, drink water." Pippi happily stood up, bowed his head and drank each sip of water. Micah sat beside him watching the dog drink, her small hand gently stroking Pippi and Appo's back. Micah happily carried two small bamboo chairs to the front yard. She placed one on the ground, the other beside it, then sat down to play with Pippi, running over to sit with Micah. While Micah was busy playing in the front yard, he returned from outside. In his hand was a bag full of food he had just bought. He stepped onto the porch, placed the bag on the small table, then looked inside the house. He saw Huyen still sitting and resting on the bed, while Micah was playing outside in the yard. He smiled softly, feeling relieved that the mother and child had returned home safely. He went inside and adjusted the pillow on the bed to make Huyen sit more comfortably. After the heavy rain, the pots inside the house were covered in mud and dirt. He gathered each one, took them to the ditch in front of the house, and sat down carefully to wash them clean. He used a dish sponge to scrub off the mud stuck to the bottom of the pots, rinsing multiple times until they were clean. Suddenly, a few raindrops started to fall on the water surface. He looked up at the sky and saw dark clouds approaching. He hurriedly went back to the garden and called out loudly, "Micah and Appo's raining now, come inside." Micah, who was playing, heard her uncle and Appo's call and immediately stood up. The girl quickly hugged both small bamboo chairs and hurried into the house. Hippie also ran closely behind. De quickly brought the cleaned pots into the house. De took the bag of rice just purchased, opened it, scooped some out and poured it into a clean pot. He carried the pot to the water jar, rinsed the rice thoroughly, picked out small stones and added just enough water. Then De carried the pot and placed it on the stove. The stove, made of mud he had built himself earlier, had been partially eroded by a heavy rain, with muddy patches still clinging around the base. De sat down, carefully straightened the pot, and lit a fire. A small flame began to burn beneath the pot. De added a few dry sticks of firewood into the stove, working while watching Huyen lying and resting inside the house. He only hoped the porridge would cook quickly so that mother and child could have a hot meal after their long journey back. The water in the pot started boiling vigorously. I took the chicken thigh I just bought, rinsed it thoroughly in a water jar, then brought it back to the stove. Gently, I dropped the chicken thigh into the boiling porridge, then used chopsticks to stir lightly, pushing the meat down below. Hot steam immediately rose in thick clouds, blending with the smoke from the stove, making the entire kitchen appear hazy. I sat down beside the stove, added a few dry sticks of wood, and attentively watched over the pot of porridge. The sky is beginning to darken. Outside, everything gradually sinks into the night. De looks around the house, then takes out the oil lamp and lights it. The small flame flickers, casting a warm yellow glow. He carefully hangs the lamp on a corner of the bamboo bed, right where Huyen is sitting and resting. The gentle light from the oil lamp illuminates Huyen's pale face. She sits leaning against the bed's edge, a thin blanket covering her, quietly gazing outside the door. De turns to look at Huyen and says, and quote, "It and Appos, it's getting dark, you can sit and rest here. The porridge is almost ready. I will call you when it and Appos is done." End quote. Huyen nods softly. In the small house, the flickering oil lamp and the smell of chicken porridge boiling on the stove create a simple evening after a long day for Huyen and Micah to return home. The final pot of porridge is finally cooked. The aroma of rice mixed with the fragrant scent of chicken fills the small house. Micah immediately runs over, hugs Da and Appos' waist and looks up at the steaming pot of porridge. Da smiles gently and says, and quote, "Go sit at the table and wait for Uncle or you and Appos. I'll get burned." End quote. Micah obediently lets go and runs to the small table to wait. Da bends down to the kitchen, adds a little seasoning to the pot of porridge, and stirs well to taste. Then he carefully scoops the porridge into each bowl and places them on a tray. The hot steam rises, carrying the gentle aroma of chicken and cooked rice. Da carries the tray into the bamboo bed, places it in front of Huyen and softly says, and quote, "The porridge is ready. You and your mother should eat while it and Appos is hot." End quote. Huyen looks at the hot bowl of porridge with a briefly touched expression. After days in the hospital, returning home and eating a bowl of porridge cooked by Da himself makes her feel incredibly warm inside. Da sat down beside the tray, carefully scooped a bowl of porridge for Micah and then another for Huyen. He brought the bowl of porridge and placed it next to Huyen, gently scooped a spoonful, blew on it to cool it down and then brought it to her mouth. Huyen gently shook her head and said, "I can eat by myself. You feed Micah." Da looked at Huyen and Appos' still tired face and softly replied, "No, I and Appos am still tired. Let me feed you." Then Da continued to sit beside her. He patiently scooped each spoonful of porridge, blew lightly to cool it and fed Huyen. Huyen obediently ate each small spoonful, occasionally looking at Da with an emotional expression. Micah sat beside her, carefully scooping a spoonful of porridge. The girl gently blew on it to cool it down before bringing it to her mouth. After finishing a spoonful, Micah happily looked at Da, her eyes shining. End quote. "Uncle Da, your porridge is so delicious. Will you cook again tomorrow?" End quote. Da smiled softly and nodded and quote, "Yes." End quote. End quote. "If the porridge is good, eat a lot so you can grow up quickly and take care of Mom Huyen too." End quote. Micah obediently nodded and quote, "Yes." End quote. Then she leaned over her bowl again, scooping another spoon, blowing on it carefully before eating. In this way, the girl ate happily, occasionally glancing at her mother. De patiently sat beside her, slowly feeding Huyen each spoonful of porridge. After eating for a while, Huyen gently reached out to stop De and Appo's hand and softly said, I and Appo's am full now, I want and Appo's teat anymore. You should eat some porridge. De looked at the remaining bowl of porridge and gently advised, try to eat a few more spoonfuls and rest when you have the strength, But Huyen just shook her head lightly, determined not to eat more. Seeing that she was tired, De didn't and Appo's insist anymore. He placed the bowl of porridge down on the tray and said, then I and Appo's I'll get some chicken for you and Micah to eat. After that, De took the soft-boiled chicken leg out of the pot and placed it on a small plate. He used scissors to cut the meat into bite-sized pieces, carefully removing the bones. De picked up a small piece of meat and held it in front of Micah, saying, Here, Micah, eat this, Micah obediently opened her mouth to accept the piece of meat, chewed slowly and happily smiled. Then De picked up another piece and gently brought it to Huyen, saying, Eat this piece of meat, you Don and Appo's need to eat much. Huyen looked at De, nodded softly, and ate the piece of meat he offered. In the small house, the mother and daughter ate and chatted while De quietly took care of Huyen and Micah, one little detail at a time. De looked at Huyen, saw that she had eaten a little and softly said, I and Appo's I'll get you some medicine to take. After saying that, De stood up and went to the medicine bag, took out the exact medicine she needed. He poured a glass of clean water, then brought the medicine and water to the bedside. De sat down next to Huyen, handed her the medicine, and held the glass of water. Take your medicine, then rest a little. Huyen took the medicine and drank a few sips of water. De still sat beside her, waiting for her to finish, then placed the glass on the table and pulled the thin blanket over Huyen. Rest now, you've been tired today. Huyen nodded softly, leaning against the pillow, feeling more at ease with De taking care of her. I scooped a portion of warm porridge into a small bowl, and brought it to place in front of Pippi. Pippi, eat up, today you also have your share. Pippi happily ran over, bowed his head, and ate each spoonful of porridge. Seeing the dog eat happily, I gathered the used bowls, plates, and spoons, placed them on the tray, and carried them to the ditch in front of the house to wash. Under the moonlight, I sat by the edge of the ditch, rinsing each bowl one by one, scrubbing off the remaining porridge stains. After washing, I turned each bowl upside down on a bamboo rack to drain, then carried them into the corner of the kitchen. De finished washing the dishes and went back into the house. He approached the bed, gently helped Huyen lie down, and adjusted the pillow to make her comfortable. Huyen looked at De, her voice full of remorse, You should go home. My mother and I have caused you too much trouble, De sat down beside her, gently shook his head, Just rest and get well. Leave it to me. With your current health, I can and Appo's be at ease leaving you alone. She said, Leave it to me. Then De bent down to pick up Micah, who was sitting nearby, and gently laid her down next to her mother. Micah obediently pulled the thin blanket over herself and snuggled close to Huyen. De pulled the blanket over the two of them, then sat down beside the bed. He reached out and took Huyen and Appo's hand, quietly staying by her side. Huyen looked at Micah lying beside her, then at De. In the small house, only the flickering oil lamplight remained. She gently squeezed De and Appo's hand, feeling both moved and grateful that, even in the hardest moment, he had not left. When the mother and child had fallen asleep, the small house became quiet. De gently stood up, went into the kitchen, brought in 2 bamboo chairs, and placed them neatly in a corner. He took a broom and quietly swept the floor in that corner, gathering all the dust after the rain. After sweeping, De laid a mat on the floor and smoothed it out, Before going outside to sit and rest in the kitchen corner, he looked once more at Huyen and Micah, to gently close the door to the room so that mother and child could sleep more peacefully. Then, he sat down on the mat he had just laid in the corner of the house. The faint yellow oil lamp flickered, casting light onto his tired face. He sat silently under the light, occasionally glancing toward the room where Huyen and Micah were sleeping. Outside the porch, night had fully fallen. Inside the small house, after a long, exhausting day, everyone had finally come back together. If everyone loves Huyen and Micah and Appo's mother, please subscribe to the channel, turn on the notification bell, and leave a word of encouragement for the two mothers to see the next developments. Every follow and every loving comment from everyone will be a source of comfort and strength to help Huyen get through difficult times. Thank you all very much.